Hello guys and gals, me Mudahar, and ladies and gentlemen, 3 years ago I made a video titled, What is TEMPLEOS? Now, TEMPLEOS is a operating system also referred to as God's operating system, the operating system that exists because God spoke to its chief soul programmer and basically guided him on a vision quest to create his own operating system. Now, I made this video 3 years ago. It's about 42 minutes long, and it kind of goes into the history of how this thing sort of came into fruition. So if you're interested in how one person made an operating system after they quote-unquote spoke to God, this is the video. But beyond just that, I wanted to look at the actual operating system today because over the last few years, there have been a lot of surprisingly interesting developments. For instance, a lot of sages and saints, if you will, have come together to basically keep this operating system alive long after its owner's demise, and basically fork it and create their own forks and versions of operating systems built off of TEMPLEOS. And not only that, but there have been people making video game engines, yes, video game engines, for an operating system that many people probably have never even really heard of. Now, if you go to TEMPLEOS's website, you'll find out, yeah, you can download this 64-bit operating system created by Terry Davis, who, 1969 to 2018, Terry Davis, unfortunately, had passed away. Now, a quick understanding of Terry Davis is he is an American computer programmer who basically designed TEMPLEOS. Now, the reality of it is he worked for Ticketmaster, and for a while, he actually did pretty well. It wasn't until 1996 that he started to experience manic episodes, actually being hospitalized and being diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And of course, later it was found out that he had schizophrenia. Now, of course, throughout the later half of his life, you could find several live streams of him basically living in homelessness. And he would get by with the goodwill and charity of others, and realistically, because of an unchecked mental illness where he wasn't really getting the help that he probably should have gotten, unfortunately, because of the amount of mental illness that he had went through, and the fact that it was so unchecked, obviously, in the last several months of his life, things had basically, escalated into getting worse and worse and worse. Sometime in 2018, he was unfortunately struck by a train and died at a pretty young age of 48. Now, obviously, it's a very depressing sort of end, and obviously, had he gotten help, maybe things would have been different. To give you a fraction of Terry Davis's unhinged nature, this is him sending a letter, or at least a piece of communication, to the Central Intelligence Agency, and at one point threatening them. If I said even half of this, I probably would be put in a CIA black site. I also appreciate how the title of this video is titled The Average Linux User, because quite honestly, it probably isn't that far off. It's crazy how you can watch Terry Davis, and this is obviously one of the last videos that he had uploaded before his demise. And it's interesting how, like, you look at this person and you think, okay, this is just like a homeless guy walking around pacing, back and forth here and there. And, he has a story, right? Like, obviously, if you were to walk past this person with no context and understanding of who this person was, you wouldn't realize that he, worked for Ticketmaster, had, like, a master's degree, a bachelor's degree, made his own operating system, which is not a small endeavor. Obviously, TEMPLEOS, for, when I was covering it in my video, it's not something that you can necessarily use as a daily driver, but the reality of why it's so impressive is that one person, Terry, on the whim of what God had told him, allegedly, was, him building his own compiler, his own programming language known as Holy C, the file system known as Red C, and of course 3D rendering engines for a lot of the various games and everything that he was producing as well. Now, on their own, these might not seem like super impressive things if you had the context of entire teams, but it's very impressive when it's just one person doing it, okay? Think about it like this. Imagine if, you wanted to build your own operating system, a daunting task in of itself. But somewhere in building that operating system, you think to yourself, I need to have a video editor. So instead of trying to get somebody to port a video editor over to your new obscure operating system, somehow Terry Davis decides to program that themselves. Oh, I need some 3D games to play? I'm sure I can write that myself and have that integrated. He's basically a man that could come up with ideas and somehow seemingly make them happen in the world of computer science, which is absolutely something that, regardless of how you view Terry Davis and his rather crass slurs, which obviously I and not a lot of people actually really support, obviously, but if you can understand, obviously, somebody mired in mental illness, it's something that you can kind of look at and then also, look at the achievements that they made. I'm going to just straight up say, for the record, somebody can be an asshole, they can be very mentally ill, they can even be racist, and they can also be a very talented programmer. None of these four things are mutually exclusive. Whether Terry is a racist or not, I don't know if I'm going to look at, the amount of slurs that he used compounded with the amount of mental illnesses that he had. Obviously, that's not the focal point of the video, but when you're covering a subject like this, it's worth discussing very briefly, and it's worth understanding, what my actual views are and why I don't condone a lot of the wild stuff that Terry was saying. But I hope that goes without saying if you've been a long-time viewer of my channel. And if you're somebody new coming in, just wanted to bring that in for the record. So with all the Augustos set aside over there, I wanted to look into actual TEMPLEOS once again. So if you actually look at TEMPLEOS, these are 6 different versions of them, and you can see that they're not necessarily huge. None of these actual ISO files are over 50 megabytes in size. This is a very small operating system, and it takes, if not seconds, to actually install and get going. So I fired up the original TEMPLEOS for good measure, just to basically see where things are at and walk you through the operating system real quickly. So as you fire it up, you'll notice that it boots up really quick. Here it is. Now it's going to ask if I want to install it to the hard drive. I'm going to say no. Do I need a tour? Obviously not. This ain't my first rodeo. Now here you get basically greeted with the terminal shell, and if you hit Control M, you basically get options to play certain games. So in amongst designing their own compiler, their own operating system over here, effectively building everything from scratch, some of the games that Terry had made was Varcom or Varoom, which again is a full 3D racing game with 3D models, an entire course to go through, and you can see things in the distance are actually detailed pretty well. Now, since this is a 64-bit operating system, oh, did I crash in? Oh, actually, I rear-ended a guy, goddamn. That's crazy. But if you look at it very carefully, you can see that there are multiple cores being used, so it has registered 4 different threads. Obviously, only one of them is really being used according to the TEMPLEOS Task Manager, and given the fact that I've given it 8 gigs of memory, it can obviously read over 4 gigs of memory because it's a true God's honest 64-bit operating system. So aside from games, obviously, Terry was also working with unfun games, or games that really weren't finished all that well. But of course, you've got scraps for code over here, and from what I understand, the DolDoc, which is actually the text editor in TEMPLEOS, was actually able to read all of these like 3D models rendered within the actual text editor itself. Now, none of that in of itself is impressive, it's just within the context of this being developed by one person. Now, obviously, Terry decided to also put some of his actual works and his own history into this as well. So if you open up the About section in TEMPLEOS, you can see that Terry says, I was a National Merit Scholar with a 1440 SAT at Arizona State University. I have a bachelor's in computer systems engineering from ASU, basically embedded systems, and a master's in electrical engineering from ASU. I worked as a software, hardware, and mechanical engineer at Ticketmaster from 1990 to 1996. He designed a 3-axis stepper motor-driven milling machine with a CAD/CAM package for a company I started called Home Automation and Robotic Equipment. So one thing interesting in this too is if you look at the credits, he does give proper credits to obviously some of the code that he might have taken, where he has exactly learned things from, and it also contains some of his own comedy here. For instance, when you're looking at this resolution, 640 by 480, it's not because Terry couldn't get this thing running in 1080p. Read this. God told me to stick with 640 by 480, 16-bit color, and single voice 8-bit signed MIDI-like sample for sound. He kept me from zombie walking into making child windows like Windows. Instead, I made 1 window per task with no child windows. He also guided my progress very obviously. Who needs NBA when you got Terry Davis's keep away? They look like Minecraft Steve going after the balls, dude. Again, all of this is just very impressive shit to have. And I'll be real, man. I mean, it is. Oh, did I get a foul? Get out of here, bro. You know, again, when it comes to like the games that Terry has designed, it wasn't just the fact that obviously he had like his own operating system. It was the fact that you were actually able to code together things in this operating system. So let's look at the people keeping this entire dream alive. Now, one of the people that are keeping this alive is Zeal OS. So the Zeal operating system is a modernized fork of the 64-bit TEMPLEOS system. So if you actually look at it real quick, they got sort of a dark mode over here, but because it's modern, the guiding principles of their development includes transparency, full user control, and an adherence to public domain and open source implementations. So what they've got over here is some new developments like 32-bit color, fully functioning AHCI support, network drivers, and an actual networking stack. See, the original Terry Davis branded TEMPLEOS didn't believe that networking even really needed to be a thing. I guess God didn't really interject there. A lot of the flaws of TEMPLEOS, as we just noticed with the resolution, was because God had interjected and told Terry to do things a certain way. Now what these guys included was 60 frames per second, VBE graphics, reformatted code, Holy C over Zeal C, and of course system-wide renaming for clarity. A lot of these things, I would wager, Terry would not agree with, and neither would God if God spoke through Terry talking about this exact issue. So I fired up VirtualBox real quick with Zeal OS running, and if you're looking at things right over here, you can see that it loads within seconds. So Zeal OS right over here, as you can see, version 2.03.117. And again, a lot of the updates don't seem to really be existing, but it does function as one would expect. And if you look very carefully over here, you can see that in the About section, they literally do talk about Terry Davis a little bit. And of course, ultimately, this is just a fork of TEMPLEOS. Terry Davis was the writer of the actual original TEMPLEOS, as they have pretty much explained. And if you want to see how fast the actual boot time here is, if you look right above C Home, you can see 0.0079106. This boots in far less than 1 second, okay? That's how efficient and clean this operating system is. If you want to talk about not having bloat, this is pretty much where it comes down to. So if you look at the actual file manager over here, a few of the things that are different as compared to the actual TEMPLEOS system was the fact that they have different networks functionality. For instance, you can fire up programs like an FTP client, Gopher, you can fire up chat clients, and whatnot. So for instance, if you open up some of these actual things, you can see that they are coded in that Holy C programming language. This is not a joke, okay? At the end of the day, this is their own programming language, and it comes with its own compilers. Now this right over here is Shrine, which is a distribution that is quote-unquote full of sin. So obviously for something like this, they wanted it to be 99% compatible with all of TEMPLEOS's programs. But they wanted to improve the OS. Again, the reason why it's heretical is because they're actually adding these improvements. Remember, ease of use is not something that God necessarily is a fan of. And Terry certainly believes that, but obviously not every single programmer. Why would you want bugs in something? All right, simple as that. So what they do mention is it comes with something known as a Lambda shell, and of course a TCP stack and internet access right out of the box. And unfortunately, while I couldn't get it working, they do actually have a package downloader, meaning that this is the TEMPLEOS with a quote-unquote, I'm not joking with you, an app store. So obviously it's a pretty simple boot up. You fire up Shrine OS, it goes through a quick load, and boom, next thing you know, you're actually in here, and you've been given Shrine OS. Now, obviously, you've got the Lambda shell in this instance. It's not running at 60 frames, it's running at 30 frames per second. There is no enhancement to the resolution or any capacity, so you are still locked to 640 by 480. The only difference here being is that there is a network stack, a package installer, which unfortunately I couldn't actually get working, sadly. But if you did, in fact, want to install packages, that functionality is still here. Getting the internet set up is not something that was functioning. There are different virtual machines you can get going. Now, to this moment in time, it's fair for me to actually explain that in the context of these TempleOS systems, there are people that have gotten these actual operating systems to run on bare metal hardware, meaning no virtual machines, it's running as native as Linux, macOS, or Windows is on your specified hardware. Now, because of the nature of TempleOS and the fact that obviously it's made by one person and forked by a few enthusiasts, it's not necessarily going to be something that has the full support of the most modern day graphics cards or, even modern CPUs or modern motherboards. You just have to basically use this in a virtual machine because that's the most compatible way for the system. And not many people go out of their way to make sure it's functioning for bare metal systems because there's only so much you can do in TempleOS, and it's not ever necessarily meant to be a daily driver. And unfortunately, throughout the course of me researching and making this video, I haven't found anybody that has made this a daily driver. Obviously, TempleOS works if all you do on your computer is type maybe text files or, play like a fucking shitty racing game. That's about it. So at some point, another group ended up coming out known as TinkerOS that also decided to add their own mixes to it. So in this situation, they actually decided to finish up some of the games. So for instance, Castle Frankenstein 2.0 is a thing, but they also decided to get the Oregon Trail, a text adventure, somehow tossed in. Do you need instructions? Absolutely not. How much do you want to spend on your Oxen team? I like how it's like, how much do you want to spend on your team? I'm going to give you like a random number. It's like, not enough. Maybe if I just give it multiple numbers here, it might just decide to go down this way. Nope, it's just giving me constant expression errors right over here. Maybe I did need the instructions, but surprisingly, yeah, they actually are making ports to games right over here. So if you wanted to play the Oregon Trail in some weird capacity, TinkerOS might be your option. Now, looking closely at TinkerOS, one thing I did want to say is obviously the creator of this, the maintainer, obviously did not condone many of the things Terry said, wrote, or did, simply looked into TempleOS from a technical perspective and thought it was worth documenting and experimenting, and therefore that's how TinkerOS effectively came into reality. Now, if you look at TinkerOS, for instance, and you go to their Git repository here, you can see that their last release was literally 4 days ago. In fact, this is a very, very well-maintained version of TempleOS. And if you look into the functionalities for it, obviously it's designed to match the look and feel of TempleOS, be a playground operating system for people who just want to experiment and, again, tinker and really not treat this as so much of a daily driver. But, of course, also bring back some old TempleOS features, popular apps, games, make it so that higher resolutions are easy to set up so you can go beyond the 640 by 360, 480 that God believed in, okay? We live in the world of ultra widescreen at this point, so why not go there? Now, one thing that I also didn't notice is there is some gaming capability to look at when it comes to Tinker or TempleOS. And the gaming functionality is quite interesting. I didn't know this, but it appears that based on, footage that I've seen from other hobbyists, there is a Game Boy emulator just floating around, and one that you can get set up in TempleOS and play with the actual system. Now, the thing is, obviously, you've got your own programming language, the Holy C, you've got your own compiler, but I think it's even more impressive that the community sat down and put together a functioning emulator for a video game console underneath God's operating system, making this the most holy way to play Doom on the Game Boy Advance or any similar Game Boy Color type game. It is impressive, and one thing that I wanted to bring up very specifically, but that's not where the gaming functionality ends. Because it seems on the internet there are people making entire game engines for this project. So let's look there. Now, on an infamous website known as Kiwi Farms, one of these users, known as Crunklord420, had posted on their own Git good account multiple different distributions and, of course, games. Games like Cyberchud. So immediately I thought to myself, all right, they made a game engine for this? Hold on. So according to their thing, on the 5th anniversary of Terry Davis's death, I released my 4th annual tribute, a TempleOS first cross-platform software rasterizing 3D rendering engine, featuring skeletal animation, normal mapping, shadow mapping, cube maps, monochromatic renderer for 16-color palletization, Quake BSP support for light baking and PVS culling. So in this, they've actually released their own fork of the operating system with their specific game. So I wanted to show you how wild this gets, and we're going to fire up a quick virtual machine and actually play CyberChud. So here it is. We're not only just firing it up, but it asks me right here if I want to play CyberChud. So I'm going to hit yes and basically get started on here. And that is, in fact, an actual 3D rendering inside. So right over here, you can see that they've got option settings, so you can enable FPS graphs. But I'm just going to go hit play and show you, for the record, this is 3D rendering happening in virtual machine software with the TEMPLEOS system. So if you look around, you've got Ryan Gosling on the wall, you've got some cube lighting, you've actually got real lighting. You've got some anime on the wall here, you've got, again, the frame rate isn't entirely perfect, but I don't expect it to. This is actual TEMPLEOS. And of course, full-on environments, full areas to roam around. And of course, if you go up to actual walls here, you can see that textures, animations, things are occurring, man. I mean, it's got that crazy vaporwave style going in. Okay, here it is. I've got a little chud jack right here. Look at you. You don't even have a gun. What do you think this is? A walking simulator? Worse, it's an engine tech demo. Anyways, here's your obligatory gun. All right, sweet. So I got the actual super shotty over here. And of course, this chud can actually go die, and boom, boom, we're going. I love the reload animation. You don't even see shells going in. But again, oh, okay, I'm actually getting shot at. There's actual AI. And I can see wireframe. And there's actual gore. Jesus Christ. So of course, if we go inside over here, we're very busy saving Western civilization. And of course, the humor here is definitely 4channy, you know, the crass side of the internet. Obviously, I don't condone it, but here we've come across the CEO of what appears to be racism, and obviously, we don't tolerate that here. Boom! Wipe that shut out of the out of existence. You got a Kiwi mention here, and of course, different areas. You've got what appears to be a dog. I can't sneed, and we need a bad enough dude to help me sneed again. Of course, buddy, I'll help you sneed. We've got more chuds. Chuds die with the super shotty. You've got dogs. Okay, interesting. I mean, it's kind of crazy that, like, a user actually ended up creating, like, a full video game engine in here. Now, obviously, you can see that they even got, like, shadows. And again, like, enemies keep respawning here. So, again, if you want to look at... Yeah, look at that. They've got, like, actual shadowing going. Look at this. Look at the casting. That is insane. Look at that. You see the lights going off. That is wow. Now, CyberChud is probably one of the most impressive pieces of gaming that I've seen on TEMPLEOS. And by most impressive, it also is one of the only pieces of serious gaming developed. I mean, more so than what Terry Davis was even doing with, you know, his Eagle games and Card Drive. This was impressive. Now, obviously, Crunklord420 decided to put another tribute into this situation, and they decided to update their engine, and in fact release Chud's Vacation. It's so crazy how, like, in order to distribute new programs, they just distribute the entire operating system, because it literally loads up in, like, seconds at a time. Play Chud's Vacation? Absolutely. So here it is. The game engine, in fact, loaded up. And you can randomize these palettes, apparently, too, to, like, you know, make sure the color is at least different. So I kind of like this vibe going for it. It's got a little sunset vibe. You've got a Chud Jack coming up here. Hey, pleb. Yeah, you. You shouldn't be here. I told the CEO we're not ready. I don't care. I just want my gun. I want to do my thing. So you go up over here. You can see that, you know, Crunklord420 is apparently on a Chuddy vacation. And if you go over here, you can grab the gun. So again, the text boxes, you can see that the lighting, everything is just, like, they've got a full lighting engine going for this. They've got, like, you know, the gun models, everything seems to work. You've got a ray gun, and again, the light is casting the shadow appropriately. And you've got Terry Davis just sitting up over there saying, make games, don't play them. Truer words could never have been spoken, Terry. I mean, they got a whole, like, laser gun, stun gun, everything, dude. You know, out of all things that I've seen on the internet, this is one of the most interesting little rabbit holes to go down. Because to understand the Terry Davis rabbit hole, you have to understand somebody that is not only an incredibly talented programmer in the sense that building their own operating system, which is not an easy feat. You know, when it comes to having massive teams that keep these things maintained, updated, it is a massive endeavor. Even your most popular Linux distribution is a massive endeavor to keep maintained and upgoing. And that is, again, a massive collaborative effort. When you look at the Linux kernel, it's efforts put in by tons of people from various different establishments. When you look at Mac OS, you look at the entirety of one of the biggest tech companies in the world putting together an operating system for a group of laptops, handheld devices, tablets, smart watches that basically keep an entire lineup going forward. When you look at the Windows operating system, as much as I like to rag on it, there is a reason why a lot of people still use it, and there's a reason why its effectiveness, is still something to be admired. It basically just works out of the box, and there is an impressive feat to it. When you look at TEMPLEOS and you look at all of these building blocks done by one person, you can't help but be impressed. And beyond just that, when you look at actual games being developed for it by Terry Davis, and of course the ability for you to actually do some level of functionality, it's not something to take lightly. But obviously, Terry Davis was a very mentally ill individual. And while there's no excusing some of the things that he has said and some of the behavior that he exhibited, there is obviously an understanding that had he gotten some help, maybe things would have been different. Maybe Terry Davis could have designed TEMPLEOS into something that could have grown into an operating system that even people, hobbyists like me that use Linux as their daily driver, might have ended up using one day. There were some things that I feel, had he come across and worked with a proper team, could have been implemented at a wider scale. But obviously, I think today's video was more for me to look at the people keeping his dream and vision alive. You know, there is something impressive by what Terry Davis did, and it's that impressive feat that has allowed people to program for him, right? Program actual applications. One of the things that I saw was a Discord client for TEMPLEOS. Now, obviously, is this still functioning? Probably not. But it's impressive to see that people who just come across the Holy C programming language actually are trying to find ways to create programs that you and I would use on a daily basis, working underneath this rather obscure operating system. When you find various people updating the operating system as much as God would fight against it to make sure that it could one day be used as a daily driver, or that maybe it has more functionality that Terry initially intended, or God intended. But when you come across people who produce entire game engines, and again, split the politics aside from it, split the crass nature of things, just look at things from a technical perspective, it shows you that TEMPLEOS really did leave a mark on the community. And yeah, because of Terry's crass nature, obviously the people working on it may be a little bit more crass, maybe a little bit more neutral, you never know. But it's this underground community that has kept this dream alive and has developed not just, a standard program for it, but in some cases full 3D rendering engines. It's something that I feel was worth bringing up and showing to you, because honestly, maybe I'm not able to convey how impressive the stuff that I've showed you is, but if I'm able to convey the impact one person left on the world before their demise, then maybe that's all that is worth showing in this video. I guess that's really what I wanted to get going. But yeah, people are keeping the TEMPLEOS dream alive. The saints or sages, whatever you want to bring across, and the game developers that are designing entire 3D engines on an operating system that I would wager not many people actually really have used, and has become more of a meme in the community, for better or for worse. But ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. I am out.